You're listening to Catalyst Talks, conversations with change agents, outliers, superheroes, and truly conscious leaders modeling what it is to be an unstoppable force for good in this world. What lit these catalysts on fire to do their work, and what nuggets of wisdom can they share with a world literally on fire? This podcast is for you who cares deeply and seeks to catalyze the world. I'm your host, Stephanie Trager. I'm a consciousness catalyst and soul coach to superstar change agents in business, leadership, and life. In this podcast, I wear an eclectic mix of hats, including earthkeeper, healer, mindset coach, lawyer, business, sustainability, and impact strategist. My intention is holding space for higher purpose, peak wellness, and soul mastery so we can live in harmony with ourselves, each other, and nature. The whole idea of Catalyst Talks in these conversations is to awaken consciousness, unlock higher purpose, and learn what it really takes to catalyze change in that scale. Subscribe to our new podcast and help us grow. We're aiming to reach 1 million people at least in 2020. Let's wake up the world together. John Perkins, my guest today on Catalyst Talks. I am so excited for you to meet John. John and I have gotten to know each other over the last few years, and I've been privileged to sit on the board of a nonprofit he founded called Dream Change. And John is well known for his book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He is a true catalyst, an author and activist who has 10 books on global intrigue, shamanism, and transformation, including Confessions, Touching the Jaguar, Shape-Shifting, that was Confessions of an Economic Hitman. These have been on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 70 weeks, sold over 2 million copies, and are published in 35 languages. As chief economist at a major consulting firm, John advised the World Bank, the United Nations, Fortune 500 companies, U.S., and other governments. He's been initiated by shamans from several indigenous cultures, and he regularly speaks at universities, economic forums, and shamanic gatherings around the world. He's the founder and board member of the nonprofit organizations Pachamama Alliance and, as I mentioned before, Dream Change. John Perkins, thank you so much for being with me here on Catalyst Talks today. It is such an honor to have you with me, and thank you for being here. You're a former economic hitman, a historian, a founder of 2 nonprofits, a shaman, best-selling author, speaker, journey, guide, father, businessman. You do a lot of things, but I want to know, and I think a lot of listeners want to know, who is the soul of John Perkins?
Well, first of all, Stephanie, thank you for having me on your podcast, and I'm so glad you're doing this. And who is the soul of John Perkins? I guess the only answer to that is it's John Perkins, and I don't know what else you mean by that, but I'm my own soul.
So what is the essence of John Perkins?
It certainly changes often. And I think that's an important aspect, the idea that we shapeshift. So yes, all those things that you mentioned, I've done and been and confessed about. I did some pretty bad stuff as an economic hitman, although for most of the years I was doing that, I believed it was the right stuff. And that's something that we've all got to deal with now. I think these times of extreme crisis are teaching us that we have to be flexible to change. And we also have to be flexible to recognize that we make mistakes, sometimes with the best of intent. And it's important not to punish ourselves over those mistakes, but to move on. I once took a group of about 30 people, and we ended up to India and to Ladakh, and we ended up spending an afternoon with the Dalai Lama at his home in Dharamsala, India. And amongst other things, somebody asked him whether he has any regrets about leaving China. And he opened that whole statement by saying, regrets are absolutely foolish. They're worthless. But it's important to learn from our experiences and to be able to adjust accordingly, to change. So I guess I'd like to say that at the essence, I hope I'm a person that's willing to recognize errors that are made and to change. I've sometimes been criticized for the books I write, the economics books, Confessions of an Economic Hitman especially, because I've been told that foreign countries, China and Russia, use that book to make America look bad. And my answer to that is, well, I'm an incredibly loyal American. My family goes back way before the American Revolution. I've always been loyal. But the United States has made a lot of mistakes, especially since the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, when we had an opportunity to really make the world a better place and be a great example, and we blew it. And the only way to change is to admit to your mistakes. And if other countries can use our mistakes to show that we've made mistakes, so be it. We've made them. We need to understand that. We don't need to regret them. We need to use them as teaching tools and move on. And that's true on an individual basis. It's true on a community basis. It's true on a global basis. I think right now, for example, the world is learning that we've all made a mistake in defining the other as the other and as sometimes the enemy. Whereas right now what we're seeing is that this is a time when we all have to recognize that although we may be citizens of China, Russia, North Korea, the United States, more than anything else, we're citizens of the world. And we're a very fragile species living on a tiny space station, really. And it just so happens that this fragile species is also the strongest in terms of manipulating the navigation of the planet, the space station. And we've been navigating her toward disaster. We've done a lousy job, especially in the last 50 years or even the last 5 years. And we've got to do a much better job. So to be open to change, that's a very long answer. Who am I? I'd like to believe I'm a person who's open to change and who helps others see the importance of changing, of shape-shifting.
So tell us about shape-shifting and what is it for people who don't know?
Well, I like to say that shape-shifting takes basically, it happens on basically 3 levels. One is the personal, the biological level, let's say the physical level, where, people read about shamans who shapeshift into jaguars or anacondas. And I've taken groups of people who've experienced that, have been with shamans that do that. Yeah, but it's only done when it's necessary. Now, most of us in the modern world don't need to shapeshift into a tree. But if you're living in the jungle and you're running from an enemy, you may want to know how to shapeshift into a tree. In our culture, physical shapeshifts like that are things like cancer. You probably, most of your listeners know people who've had cancer and had what we call miraculous cures. Shapeshifts out of that. Then when we cut ourselves, our body shapeshifts. It heals. It heals the cut. That's an amazing shapeshift. If you think about, probably the most amazing shapeshift of all is when 2 tiny cells get together from your mother and your father, and out of that comes you, a person with eyes and nose and mouth and all the amazing characteristics that we have as individuals. What magic is that? So there's physical shape-shifting, and it takes many different forms. And I can talk about some physical shapeshifts I had. In fact, when I had 70% of my colon removed and then it came back, that's another story. But so a more common shapeshift in our culture, I think, is the personal shapeshifting, the second form, which is, what psychotherapy is all about. What a lot of teachings today are about. How do we become better? How do we drop addictions? And how do we become better as writers or artists or whatever it is we want to be? How do we shapeshift ourselves so that we can be more of who we really want to be? We can find our bliss and travel the path toward our bliss. And the third type is institutional shapeshifting. And that's something that we're all looking at right now with this virus. What's wrong with our healthcare systems that we can't handle this? What's wrong with our governmental system that it can't seem to rally and take care of this? A system that's built up amazing military defenses, spends almost $700 billion a year on military defenses, but it can't react to a tiny virus that we can't even see. How do we shapeshift our institutions? How do we move from what I and many other economists call a death economy, which we can talk about more if you want later, into a life economy? So that's the third type of shapeshifting. And I'd have to say that the shamans that I've worked with in places like the Amazon wouldn't make the 3 distinctions they would see it all kind of as one, and in a way it is all one. You almost you can't have the institutional shape shifting probably without the personal shape shifting. Change their perceptions and values, and then their actions, and then you have to change your actions, and that's a physical shape shift. So they kind of all go together. But for purposes of writing and definition, I think it's kind of fun to classify it into those three categories.
I love that. It's fun to classify. I've had experiences. I've had two distinct experiences in the Amazon, one in Ecuador and one in Peru, where I've seen shamans shapeshift into other entities. And I love your distinction around how in the Western world, that it's a different paradigm in the Western world than shamans in the Amazon, for example. We live in a kind of different construct and with different worldviews. So going back to the idea of shape-shifting institutions, and going back to like your initial, who is the soul of John Perkins, being willing to see our mistakes. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are around like really how is this change going to happen if we all have such differing worldviews? Like those people you take and people who see a shaman shapeshift in the Amazon, they're changed, right? Their worldview is just changed. And so short of everyone having an experience where they can really see outside of their own paradigm, how are we going to all really align on the same page about the next evolution of humanity?
Well, part of the answer to that is we don't all have to be aligned. It just takes what's called a critical mass. And we don't know exactly what that is, but it can be a fairly small number of people that changes things. So let me give an example. When I went to business school pre-1976, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors. And he also takes good care of his employees, gives them health care insurance and retirement pension and so forth, and takes good care of his customers and suppliers and the communities where the business operates. Not pays taxes, yes, imagine that. And also invests in the local educational system or recreational facilities or something. But then in 1976, all that changed. It had been building. This wasn't the first person to speak of it, but it was Milton Friedman when he won the Nobel Prize in economics, said, and I paraphrase, but basically the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term shareholder profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. He in essence went on and said that if we maximize short-term profits, all the environmental and social costs will be taken care of. Well, that's a terrible statement, but it's only a perception, but it bought into big time by Reagan, Thatcher, and many CEOs, and it has really resulted in what we call a death economy, a form of capitalism that's consuming itself into extinction, that's using the very resources upon which it depends in the long run, it's burning them up in the short run. And but it's all based on that one perception. And that perception doesn't have to be accepted by the majority of the world. The majority of the world doesn't even think about what the goal of corporations are. Like most people in the world don't have time to think about much other than putting food on the table for their kids. That's like 50% of the world. People probably like you and me and most of our listeners, we just kind of accept that that's what that businesses are doing, what businesses do, until we really start thinking about it. So it didn't have to be accepted by a lot of people. The converse of that, to create a life economy, an economic system that pays people to clean up pollution and rejuvenate devastated environments and come up with new technologies that don't destroy the earth, that don't rely on depleting its source of resources, a life economy, to create that, all we need to do is change a perception. And that instead of maximizing short-term profits, let's maximize long-term benefits for everyone and everything, for all of nature, for the world, for let's take care of everything. And all you got to do is have a few key people, relatively few key people, buy into that perception. If Forbes magazine or Fortune magazine or Time magazine and television shows started honoring the executives who operate their corporations and leaders who operate government and institutions based on that perception, you only need a handful of them in a few key countries to accept that. And Stephanie, I have to say, it's happening. And it may not be happening fast enough to please me or you, but it's happening. The Green New Deal, B corporations, benefit corporations. And then there was the business roundtable in last August that 192 of the world's most successful corporate executives came out with a statement that it was no longer going to be about just maximizing profits, that they needed to put a greater emphasis on taking care of their clients, their customers, and their employees and the communities where they work, exactly what a life economy demands. So we're seeing that the message get out there, the critical mass is beginning to happen. Now you and I have to help them take the actions necessary to actually implement this.
Yes, there's so many things that you just said I wanted to respond to, ask you about, because I actually just read today a commentary about the Business Roundtable. It was last September that they put out a statement about the shifting from Milton Friedman's The Purpose of a Corporation. And today I read a commentary about how many of those CEOs are actually responding in the face of this pandemic. And so I also throw in there, while there's so much good happening, and I agree with you, the perception of good is going to win. There's also, we have to be mindful of the shape-shifting ability of those who, recognize that they have to say certain things to fit in right now, like marketing. And how do we position ourselves to be relevant in these times? What is the purpose of a company? But how are they really acting behind the scenes? So I think there is good. I think from what's happening, a lot of it is siloed, and it's the coming together. And that brings me to the coming together of the different silos, even within one company, to really have a transformation. And that brings me to how you speak about the prophecy of the condor and the eagle. I was actually supposed to be opening an event a few weeks ago talking about this prophecy, and it's so relevant. And that was before the outbreak. So I'd love to hear how you learned about the eagle and the condor prophecy, and tell us how that relates to what we're going through right now.
Well, let's see. So, as you know, I was a Peace Corps volunteer deep in the Amazon of Ecuador, and then in the mountains of Ecuador from 1968 to 71, about 3 years. And I heard the prophecy back in those times, and I've been hearing it ever since. And it really is that the prophecy goes back, we don't know how long, but probably 2,000-3,000 years. Nobody knows for sure how far back this oral history goes. And it essentially says that human beings, back a long time ago, the prophecy says in the midst of history, 3,000 years ago, they were saying in the midst of history, human societies would decide to take two different paths, two different flights. One would be the flight of the condor, which they said was the flight of the heart, of intuition, of creativity. We might even stretch that a little bit and say perhaps that's the feminine path. And the other would be the path of the eagle, the path of the mind, of rationality, of industry, maybe even the male path. And the prophecy said that these two groups of people would go in very different directions for many, many years. And then during what's called the fourth Pachacuti, and a Pachacuti in Quechua, the language of the Andes, is a 500-year interval. The fourth Pachacuti occurred, according to our calendar, in about 1500. It was said that at that time, the eagle and condor would come together and clash, and the eagle would be so strong as to practically force the condor into extinction, but not quite. And we know that happened. Columbus, 1492. After that, the industrialized countries of the world practically destroyed the indigenous ones, but not quite. The prophecy goes on to say that in the fifth Pachacuti, 500 years later, around the year 2000, the opportunity would happen for the eagle and the condor to fly together, to soar in one sky, to dance, to mate, and to create a new offspring, which would be higher consciousness. And we've been seeing that happen. You know, the tremendous interest in shamanism and indigenous cultures and so on and so forth that started around in the 1990s in the United States and Europe and other places. At the same time, the shamans and the indigenous people really came out of hiding and said they wanted to share their messages. So we've been seeing that happening, and I think it's been very strong. It needs to be a lot stronger, but it doesn't imply that one is better than the other. It just implies that there needs to be balance. And you know, I think one of the ways we've been seeing that the balance hasn't happened is that when there are these once in a 100-year events like big hurricanes that happen every couple of years now, or tsunamis or fires like we're having in places like Australia and the Amazon. It's amazing. And California. When we have those, the talk is always about how do we prevent that in the future? How do we rebuild amongst the eagle peoples? But amongst the condor peoples, it's like Mother Earth is speaking to us. She's telling us that we're getting to be a big nuisance, and if we don't reform, she'll just treat us like so many fleas and shake us right off. And she's twitching with these once in 100-year events that happen every year or so. We haven't been listening. We've seen these as local things that can be resolved, that can be rebuilt. Now this virus is the latest. And it's not local, it's global. And when you have these other events, you think if you survive the hurricane, then sometime within the next few days or maybe a couple of weeks, but sometime soon, the outside world will come to your rescue. Water bottles will arrive, food will start to flow in, and some politician will tell you that we're going to rebuild. Well, the coronavirus has taught us that there is no outside world. Nobody's coming to our rescue except us. And I think this is the latest manifestation that we have opened to the prophecy, but we haven't really followed it. That we really need to listen to the voices of this planet, whether you think, as the indigenous people do, that it's a living earth, that it's a great spirit called Pachamama, or whether you just believe that it's just a big piece of rock, orbiting around the sun that happens to have had the good fortune of creating life on it, doesn't really matter, because the fact of the matter is, in either of those cases, we're destroying life as we know it on this planet through our industries, through our way of life, through our way of conducting business and government, and the planet is speaking. Whatever you believe is whether it's coming from a spiritual aspect or whether it's purely physical, we are learning that we cannot continue on this path, and hopefully this virus is going to teach us that, because if it doesn't, we'll get hit by something even worse.
So you talk about merging the condor and the eagle coming together at this time, and your new book that a lot of people are excited to read, Touching the Jaguar. I would love to hear about, if you can tell me what inspired you to write this next book. And you've written a lot of books. Curious what inspired you to write this book, and how you see it as a prescription for the eagle and the condor coming together.
Well, as far as what inspired me, I think I have to go back to when I was first living in the Amazon back in the late 60s, and I was dying in the Amazon. I was very, very sick. And a shaman healed me, and one night it was what we might call miraculous. But what it really was I had this shamanic journey where I saw that it was my perception that was killing me, not the food and drink that I every time I ate and drank, I thought, well, this stuff is, I can't eat and drink this stuff, but I've got to eat and drink something, so I'm going to eat and drink it. And then to hear this voice saying, well, this is what they call it's a chicha, which is a drink they make in the Amazon, because nobody drinks water from the rivers. The rivers are too filled with organic matter. So women make a kind of beer called chicha, which they make by chewing and spitting the manioc root, and it sets up a fermentation process. Then you can add water. Spit beer. Well, I was drinking a lot of that because you got to rehydrate a lot in the Amazon. But every time I was drinking it, I saw on the shamanic journey, I would hear a voice saying, "Son, it'll kill you." But I saw how incredibly healthy the Shuar, the indigenous people I was living with, how incredibly healthy they were, and lived to be very old if they didn't die in a hunting accident or some sort of snake bite or something. And so that night I saw that what was killing me was my perception, my mindset. And then I trained with that shaman afterwards, and I've trained with shamans in many different cultures and many different parts of the world since then. And everywhere I've learned that all of shamanism is about realizing that all of human activity is controlled by our perceptions. Our perceptions drive our reality. When you think about it, there's no United States, there's no Canada, there's no Russia, there's no religion, there's no culture. There are no corporations except as we perceive them. When enough people accept a perception or codify it into law, again, that critical mass, it has a huge impact on reality. And this is not only the basis of shamanism around the world. I discovered it is the basis of shamanism around the world. It's also the basis of psychotherapy, of quantum physics, of advertising, of marketing, of capitalism, if you will. It's the basis of all human activities when you come right down to it. And so, this perception that we've had has created a reality, this perception of maximizing short-term profits or short-term benefits for us as individuals. What do I do in the short term to bring me the greatest happiness, the greatest immediate rush of adrenaline, rather than really looking at what are the long-term benefits? And I think I've kind of lost the question that you asked. Was there a specific question I need to address?
No, you're totally addressing it. You're addressing it. Well, the inspiration, first it was the inspiration for Touching the Jaguar.
Yeah, the inspiration was that as I wrote the books on shamanism, there's 5 of them, which I wrote before the economics books. I was addressing this deep idea that one of the titles of the books is "The World is as You Dream It," which is really about how the world is as we perceive it. When we have a perception, then we take the actions that create reality. And then I wrote 4 books on global economics. Confessions of an Economic Hitman was the first. And I realized, and in those books, I'm constantly talking about how we need to shapeshift. Basically, I don't use that word in the economics books, but transform the death economy into a life economy. And as I wrote these books, I was very aware that what we're really talking about here is a very shamanic process, is we just have to change the perception, move away from that perception of maximization of short-term profits to maximization of long-term benefits. And to do that, we just change our perceptions. So, but people would constantly ask me, like, I can't believe you're the same person that wrote those books on shamanism. I would hear that from the people who came to my business talks. And from the people who came to my shaman workshops, I'd hear, did you really write those books on economics? They're worlds apart. To me, they were never worlds apart. So Touching the Jaguar is the bridge. I overtly, in that book, addressed this issue of how these 2 worlds come together. And that was my inspiration, if you will, was to get that out there. And I like all my books, it's nonfiction, but I tell it through stories, what we call narrative nonfiction, which to try to make it fun and exciting and personal, and in itself kind of its own shamanic journey, if you will. Storytelling, in a way, is a shamanic journey. So the inspiration was there, and then the idea of Touching the Jaguar, that came from when this shaman healed me back in 1969 when I was dying, and he took me on this shamanic journey, and he said to me at one point when I'm in this trance state, "Touch the jaguar." And what I saw was this voice, I really saw my mother saying, "Son, this food will kill you." And rather than running from the food, I reached out and touched, well, what is this food? And saw when I did that in this shamanic journey I was on, I touched that jaguar. And suddenly I heard, the Shuar are very healthy. This food is extremely nutritious. To put it into modern terms, it was organic and local. It was great food. And so once I touched that jaguar, I changed my perception of the food and became healthy very, very quickly. So I think that what we look at now is touching that jaguar means for all of us, we all know we need to change. We know it. Everybody knows it. Every executive I talk to, CEOs of big corporations, they know. They just are afraid to do it. I hear executives after executives saying things like, I want my company to be greener. I have kids, I have grandchildren, but I'm afraid if I lose 0.5% of market share or my stock prices go down, the major stockholders will fire me and they'll replace me with someone who doesn't give a damn about green, only cares about stock market prices and market share. And I hear that over and over. And then, people like probably most of your listeners, like me, will say, well, yeah, I know we need to change, but wow, I like the house I live in. I like the fact that I can travel to the Amazon and take groups of people 2 or 3 times a year to the Maya of Guatemala and the Kogi of Colombia and so on. Do I really want to see change? And then half the world can't even think about change because they're just putting food on the table for the next meal for their family if they're lucky. And then there's the people at the top of the economic pyramid that feel that they've got all the power and most of the money and they're sitting on top of the world. They don't want change. So that's that jaguar. We know we have to change. This is not working. We know that these once in 100-year events are going to continue to happen and they're going to get worse and worse unless we change. And the virus is just the last messenger in that regard. So we've got to touch that jaguar. And when we do, it inspires and empowers us to change our perceptions. And as we change our perceptions, we change our values. And as we change our values, we change our actions and we take the actions necessary to create systems that are successes instead of this failed death economy. We will create, it's not just an economy, it's a governmental, social, economic system it's been terribly destructive and is destructive. And now we must convert it. We must transform it. We must shape shift it.
I also work in the realm of bridging worldviews. And I think I love what you're talking about. And I'm seeing as you're speaking, kind of building this construct of possibility, and that touching the jaguar is the key. It's the shapeshift we need to do to get into the next step. And at the same time, there are, like you said this before, there's so many things happening right now simultaneously, where you have regenerative agriculture. People are really working on regenerative economics and circular economies and zero waste and all kinds of systems change strategy, not only strategies, but like figuring out how this can work so that we have an alternative. So the CEOs who are saying, we want this, but there needs to be a shift in the perception so they can realize that this could actually work. Again, how do you see that shift happening? Do you think that this pandemic that we're going through right now is going to accelerate that shift, or have people contract and sort of go back?
Well, I am extremely hopeful that this pandemic is going to teach us. I actually think a lot of that will depend on the next elections in the United States. I think the current administration has been extremely negligent in dealing with this. They've not done a good job. Here we are, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, with the 3rd largest population, and we've had more cases of coronavirus and more deaths than any other country, including China and India. Now, people may say they're just not reporting correctly, but I'm not sure we're reporting correctly either. But to the best of our knowledge, that's the case. And for sure, we've got a lot more cases and a lot more deaths than we should have. We spend roughly almost $700 billion a year on the military budget. And what we've learned is that missiles are not going to attack this enemy, you know, and the gun-toting cowboy out there isn't going to be able to shoot it down. So we really don't, we've got to change the way we look at what it means to be human on this planet. And hopefully this virus is going to push us to do that. If it doesn't, then something else will come along. I'm convinced it has to, because it's a self-regulating system. And if species that don't contribute don't make it. And right now we're not contributing to the betterness of this planet. So it remains to be seen. I have a newsletter coming up now or soon, johnperkins.org, that addresses I think the 12 likely impacts of this virus, and they're all very positive ones that they put. I guess I say they're hopeful. I'm hopeful. There are more than 12. I just identified 12 that I think are very important. And to a large degree, they revolve around the fact that we'll understand that we don't need to burn as many fossil fuels. We don't need to travel as much. We can do a lot more the way you and I are doing it right now, virtually. People are learning that they don't have to walk corridors and visit with their friends and then move chairs around in order to have a half an hour meeting. It takes them an hour. Or they have to fly to someplace or drive to someplace. They don't have to do that. And universities and colleges and high schools and grade schools even are learning that they can do a lot virtually, which doesn't deny the importance of human interpersonal contact. We need that. But we can also realize that we can do a lot more without that huge time that's and energy that's wasted on moving from place to place. So I think, and it can be very exciting. Moving into a life economy is a very, very exciting prospect. I think we should all feel blessed that we have this opportunity. This is not about going back to live in grass houses. This is about creating an economic system that pays people to let's say, pays companies like Raytheon that currently make weapons. Let's pay them instead to hire people, maybe the same people, as brilliant scientists they have, to come up with ways to mine the plastic in the oceans and to rejuvenate many destroyed ecosystems, to clean up pollution, to come up with a whole new energy producing systems. The solar and wind are just in their infancy still. They can get to be a lot more efficient, and we probably can produce energy directly from the air. So let's pay people to do these things. And what an amazing, we could have a full employment economy just doing those kinds of things.
So who do you define as the current economic hitmen? Are there still economic hitmen? And if there are, how are they showing up now? And how do you actually see them potentially showing up as we kind of emerge and rebuild the market?
The last book I wrote just before Touching the Jaguar was called The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And I wrote that because in the 12 years after the original, as I was writing The New Confessions, the whole economic hitman business had gotten worse. People around the world were understanding it. I get so many comments from people in so many places that sold over 2 million copies in 37 languages, the original. People were getting it. But at the same time, business was setting in and trying to stop any movement toward a new system. And so today, and who knows what this virus is going to do, but up until very recently, we continue to have the kind of economic hitman that I was. I'd say that's generic. Somebody who is hired by organizations like the World Bank and so forth to go out and create opportunities for American businesses or businesses representing whatever country it is to make big profits off infrastructure projects in these countries and to basically take control of the countries. That still happens. But in addition, now there's a lot more economic hitmen because every major corporation has their version that's out there promoting their interests. A case in point are these big companies that will go into New York City and also Los Angeles and also St. Louis when they're going to build the next factory and have these cities compete with each other for tax breaks and for cheap labor or real estate or whatever. And they do it on a country basis too. They go to Indonesia and they have Indonesia compete with the Philippines and Nicaragua. These are just examples, but these economic hitmen are out there trying to create these deals for individual corporations. Also, they take the form of lobbyists and what's advisors, consultants. Often these are people that have been in politics. There were senators, there were House of Representatives people who've lost their jobs, but the big corporations, that they always represented big corporations because they knew that if they lost their jobs, these big corporations would hire them. So they're out there lobbying to make the corporation more profitable, to increase its size and its profits, to create laws and to create laws that allow corporations to finance campaigns. So what we've got now is a huge number of what I'd call economic hitmen, ones that did what I did. They're kind of a minority now, and ones that every major corporation has their own version of economic hitmen that are just promoting that company.
Yeah, so your type of economic hitman is now the elite, right? Now there's so many forces that we don't see. And back then, when you were active, people didn't see, they didn't really understand. Now you can paint the picture and it makes a lot of sense, but people didn't really understand what was going on at mainstream. And so today we have censorship. We have massive censorship happening right now on all public platforms where people go to get news and information. And we also have, sort of differing worldviews potentially about the idea of 5G and electrification of the planet. And there's a lot of people who are against that. And then there are people saying, no, but it's fine. And that is being pushed through really quickly. And so we have to question if there's an agenda behind that, if there are economic hitmen behind that, and some new definition of an economic hitman. But I would like to know from you, how can we all touch our own Jaguar? And when I say that, I want to hear you speak to what is your biggest fear? And we all have a fear. And so in order to ask others to touch their Jaguar, we have to be willing to do it ourselves. So I'm curious if you have any fears right now that are up for you. You're a prolific creator. You're an author of so many books, and you're out there in the world and you're active. And I'm curious, what do you have any mindsets that get in the way that force you to have to touch your Jaguar on a day-to-day to show up in the way you do?
Yes, constantly. So there's levels. So so you can take right now, there would be the fear of catching this virus, and how far do I take that fear? How do I become really paranoid, or do I reach out and say, well, and I'm honest. I want to start by saying I'm very, very careful. I'm self-quarantining, but I do jog in the forest near my house every day, and I pass people there, and I keep a good distance, but I'll talk to them and so forth. I'm not, I don't think I'm paranoid, but I'm careful. But what I've also realized is the fear of this virus is a fear of what? Getting sick, dying. And there's a Jaguar to touch there. I'm going to die. We're all going to die. And so then I'll say, but I've always thought, well, I'm going to die quickly in an airplane crash in the Amazon or something like that. That would be the way I want to go. I want to go on a good adventure and just have it happen. And, something spectacular, something that makes the news. Not suffocating from a virus, basically smothering to death. But then I touch that Jaguar, and I do this. I say to myself, well, but wait a minute. Maybe that's exactly what you need, because maybe with my training and my background in shamanism, I don't believe life ends. I believe that the physical body ends, but the soul goes on. And Einstein said, matter and energy never end. They just shapeshift, they just transform. I believe that my energy, the soul, will continue and has been there forever. So maybe, suffocating, a slow death from the virus maybe that's what I would need. If that's what would happen to me, I'll accept that that's what I need, because that'll give me time to contemplate, perhaps to go through the struggle. It's not what I want, but if that's what comes. So you touch that jaguar. Whereas dying quickly in an airplane crash, well, I wouldn't have time to really contemplate my life and go back and review it, which I'm pretty sure my dad and mom both did, because they died. My mom was in a coma for 46 days from a stroke. And my dad was also in a coma for about a week. And I had the very distinct feeling from just being with them that they were going through some pretty profound experiences there. So that's just one example. A jaguar that we have to touch every day. The bigger jaguar, I guess, that I have to touch is, and my hope here is that I'm able to continue to help, along with you and many other people that are involved now in really reaching out to a large audience around the world, an increasingly large audience, to convince people that we all need to change. And every one of us, to do this, to do what you're doing, Stephanie, to start this podcast, you had to touch your own jaguar. I'm sure there were things that told you, well, I can't do that. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have the whatever. I get that when I'm writing a book. Do I have the time to start a new book? Do I have the ability? Do I have the energy? We have to touch those jaguars. And so here we are. There's the big jaguars, and there's this daily jaguars. The daily jaguars. Oh, look at that incredible! Look at that incredible piece of cake. But I just had a piece of pie earlier today. Can I afford that other piece of sugar? Why do I want that cake? What's the jaguar there? Reach out and touch it and say, no, I'll eat the carrot instead. Instead of the carrot cake, I'll eat the carrot.
It is a growth opportunity. And so I love that we have the big jaguars and the little jaguars. And it really does. And thank you for sharing your personal experience, because for most of us, these patterns show up. Our jaguars show up in different shapes. They shape shift too throughout our life, but it's often a similar jaguar, like yours in the jungle with your mom's voice saying, you're going to get sick. And so here, your jaguar today you shared was about this fear of this thing. So what is a nugget you can share? Just in closing, you shared a lot of nuggets. Millions of people listening right now who are touching their own jaguars every day, or need to, and might be sabotaging or not touching their jaguar. What is one piece of wisdom and advice that you would give to people who need to touch this jaguar to get their own medicine into the world? Like, we're all being called to expand and step into this next version of ourselves so we can hold space for this beautiful life economy, right? We are all part of it. And so touching our jaguars in order to get there, what piece of advice would you give people?
Okay, well, I'll start with, in the book, Touching the Jaguar, I devote quite a lot to the process people can go through and quickly summarize it. And there's actually a daily action that people can take for less than 10 minutes a day that's in there. And so there's a process there that I don't have time to go into right now. But I think the number one thing is for people to answer the question, who and what am I and what do I want to be? What will give you the greatest satisfaction in your life? What brings you the greatest bliss? What if you were to think of lying on that proverbial deathbed, here we go back to that, and look back on your life, what would you say, I wish I had done, that you haven't done, and now do it? And because we're never successful unless we really follow our bliss. We really do what brings us the greatest satisfaction. And we can maybe make a lot of money, but we won't be truly prosperous. So really look at what brings you the greatest satisfaction. What do you most want to do with your life? And then you look at, well, what's stopping me from doing that? What are the voices? What's the voice that's telling me that this food is killing me, kind of thing? What teacher, what book, who's told me that I'm not good enough? I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough education. I'm not of the right nationality, whatever. What are the voices there? What's stopping you? And then how do you touch that jaguar? Those are jaguars. How do you touch them? What do you go back and say? Oh, okay, so here's a voice. Well, John, you know, and I had an English teacher who said this, your writing just isn't good enough. You know, and he kept giving me C's. And that discouraged me terribly. That's one of the reasons I went to business school. I stopped wanting to be a writer back a long, long time ago. Went to business school, became very successful as a chief economist at Economic Hitman. And then at some point, I realized that this same professor had been extremely critical of Bob Dylan and his writing. And Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize in Literature. So touching that jaguar, I saw, well, this professor doesn't necessarily know who's a good writer and who isn't. And then I realized, you know, and I got to tell you, Confessions of an Economic Hitman was rejected by 39 publishers before it was finally published, and then became a big-time bestseller over a year and a half, about a year and a half on the New York Times bestseller list, so on. And every time I get one of those rejection letters, 39, can you imagine having 39 rejection letters? But every time I got one, the temptation was to give up. Instead, I touched those jaguars and I said, well, maybe that editor had a fight with his spouse at breakfast this morning, or came to work with a headache, or had just published a book similar, that he thought was similar to this, or she thought was similar to this, and it didn't make it. I don't know, but it doesn't mean the book's no good. It just means these editors have some other reason, or as it turned out, most of them were afraid of it for political reasons. That was Confessions of an Economic Hitman, or they were afraid that I was not telling the truth, which later was vetted and shown that I was. But so those jaguars I had to touch, and I think we all need to. So look at what is it you really want to do. And for me, all my life, I wanted to be a writer. Always wanted to be a writer. I took this great diversion to become an economic hitman, and then realized part of that was to give me the materials that I needed to write about. But there was this jaguar that first stood in my way, which was an English teacher. And every one of us has that, you know. So you're a yoga teacher or a carpenter, and you say, I want to help make a better world, to create this life economy. But the carpenter says, my clients don't like me using sustainable materials because they cost a little more. Well, that's a jaguar. And what you got to do is go out to your clients and say, hey, this isn't a cost. This is an investment in the future. You're investing in the future for your children and grandchildren. And the yoga teacher says, well, when I'm teaching yoga, nobody wants to hear me lecture about the life economy. But instead, you turn it around and say, yeah, but people are taking yoga because they want to make their lives better. So how do I tie in making their lives better and their children's lives better and the life of the world better with that? How do I teach that, incorporate it? No matter what you are, follow your passion and use whatever skills you have to realize your passion, but tie that passion in also to the passion you have for creating a life economy, for making a better world for yourself and for future generations. That was kind of a long answer. Actually, the summary, the teaching in the course is much shorter than that and probably much more effective.
No, that was perfect. That was perfect. And you know what, I'd also say, as somebody myself who I feel like my perception is wide open and I'm woke and I get it. I also know that, like you said we circle back to the beginning where you talk about just knowing, being willing to accept our mistakes. Also being willing, and this is for me too, is all of us to be willing that we only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. And, you know, to also keep an open mind to learning even more or better ways to share and proliferate.
Right.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome, Stephanie, and thank you for doing this. I'm so glad that you've touched that jaguar and you're sitting in front of that microphone and we're talking and you're doing this podcast. Thank you so much, because it's so badly needed, so greatly needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And everyone, I'll be posting in the show notes how you can find John, how you can find his newsletter, how you can order his new book and access this workshop. And definitely stay on top of John's perspective, because it is important for us to shape-shift this world.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Catalyst Talks. Stay tuned for what's up next, and please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen. You'll find those links at catalysttalks.com. Join us. We continue this conversation on social media, and if you'd like to reach out to me privately, you can send me a message at stephanietrager.com. Your attention here means the world to me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.